Okay, so greetings and welcome to today's educational program, How Award-Winning Leaders Engage Employees to Achieve Exceptional Results. This is Doug Wood with the ASQ Quality Management Division. I'm joining the program today from Fairway, Kansas. I want to make sure that everybody understands what they can do here with the screen. They can chat, okay, there's a chat window. It says send to, all right. You can also use the question and answer window, Q&A, and you put a question in there, and we will be answering some of those during the talk. Some of them we may hold to the end. There will be time for questions at the end of Kay's talk. So today's program is being recorded. Any views expressed in this webinar are for general education purposes only and do not represent any official views or positions of the sponsoring or presenters organizations. So you will receive an email roughly between 2 hours and 24 hours after the webinar. It'll be documenting your RUs, your recertification units, for attending this event. It is 0.1 RUs for the hour-long talk here. So we are looking forward to your great comments and questions during the program. We invite you to shut off your cell phone, shut the door, and warm up your fingers, and give us your great input. Tell us what you're thinking. If you have a comment or question, you can use the chat or the Q&A window. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Kay Kendall. Please join me in welcoming her. Kay has spent more than 20 years as an executive leading large-scale change initiatives across diverse industries. Kay served on the panel of judges for the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Program for 3 years. She served for 5 years as a master examiner and team leader for the AHCA NCAL Quality Award Program. She's a judge for PIPEX, the Baldrige-based program serving Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Her company, BALDRIGECOACH, has worked with many organizations that have received the prestigious Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. She's a co-author of the Executive Guide to Understanding and Implementing Baldrige in Healthcare, Evidence-Based Excellence. She's also a co-author of Leading the Malcolm Baldrige Way, How World-Class Leaders Align Their Organizations to Deliver Exceptional Results. So, Kay, say hi.
Hi. Hi, Doug. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this webinar. So these are the objectives of the webinar, and I hope that I'll be able to share with you some of these lessons learned and best practices that you can apply in your own organizations. So a little bit about the book that Doug alluded to is it's based on the research that we did through interviews. We interviewed more than 50 executives from 31 award-winning organizations across all sectors and all sizes and a variety of geographic locations. Some were part of a parent organization and some of them were single entities. And we also conducted research in the published literature. So if you do a browser search of the term workforce engagement, there are millions of hits in just a fraction of a second and about as many different definitions of the term. And since we were writing a book about Baldrige leadership, we decided to use the definition in the glossary of the Baldrige Excellence Framework. One of the things that we really liked about this definition is it talked about workforce members feeling engaged when they find personal meaning and motivation in their work, and when they receive interpersonal and workplace support. And the engaged workforce benefits from trusting relationships, a safe and cooperative environment, good communication and information flow, empowerment and accountability for performance. And I think you're going to see elements of these attributes in many of the recipients that we're going to feature in this webinar. In writing our book, we did a lot of research in the literature, and we were already well aware of the first 3 bullet points in terms of the high cost of turnover. But the actual cost of high turnover in terms of replacing employees that turn over at all levels in the organization was actually pretty staggering for us. And if you think about entry-level employees that may turn over multiple times during the year in replacing that position, that number can also become huge. And so we were really convinced that we had an opportunity to try to understand what separates organizations that are able to engage their workforce from those who don't. So if you look at this information, it depends on the study that you look. The numbers will vary, but it really is pretty consistent that depending on the study, regardless of the industry and the type of the workforce, highly engaged employees comprise only 24 to 30% of their workforce. So that's about a quarter of your workforce you can count on being engaged, which leaves the vast majority unengaged. But the number doesn't really surprise me that much because I observe so many times in organizations, particularly in service industries, how many times when you encounter a problem in a service industry, do you get someone who takes ownership of your problem, or do you get the 3 or 4 dreaded handoffs and the lack of follow-through to make sure that the problem is effectively and efficiently resolved? But what started to trouble us was with the high percentage of disengaged employees, what's the cost if they stay? Not if they leave, but if they stay. And what we found is that organizations with a significant percent of disengaged workers have significantly higher rates of absenteeism, more accidents, more errors and defects, and bottom line impact in terms of lower productivity, lower profitability, and if they're publicly traded, lower share growth over time. What's particularly frightening is that in healthcare, there's increased medication and other safety patient issues. One of the unquantified costs, but no real, that we discovered and have encountered is the burnout that other employees encounter from picking up an unfair share of the work and covering extra shifts when their disengaged coworkers call out and don't show up. So what are the causes of the lack of workforce engagement? The top 4 are generally well recognized in the research, and we've also seen it in our work with other organizations. It really points out to a lack of trust in the senior leadership. A second factor is an inability to see how what they do as an individual employee contributes to a greater purpose. Lack of responsiveness by management to issues. How many of you in your organizations conduct employee satisfaction surveys? What do you do with those results? Because if you ask the employees how they feel about things, there's an expectation on their part that you're going to do something about their areas of dissatisfaction. The fourth area is a lack of opportunity for growth of personal development. That feeling of, I'm just stuck in a rut, and this is the only place I'll ever be. We're working with a client now whose previous CEO reinforced a culture of fear and intimidation. The new CEO is the right kind of leader who truly values employee engagement, but it's going to take some time to turn the toxic culture around and for him to really genuinely convince the employees that they can trust in him. Now, here's some specific areas that we're going to cover in the rest of the webinar. We're going to talk about best practices in recruiting, hiring, and retaining employees. We're talking about ensuring a safe operating environment, how we foster an organizational culture that's characterized by open communication, high performance, and an engaged workforce, and truly leveraging the drivers of workforce engagement. So you may think when you see some of the organizations that we featured in this webinar that they really don't have any relationship to what your organization does. But when we interviewed Diane Brockmeyer for our book, we loved her quote when she said, we were surprised at how much we could learn from other organizations outside our industry. In fact, at our first Quest for Excellence, we attended the sessions presented by Park Place Lexus. We got so many good ideas and best practices from a car dealership. And this is an organ donor and transplant organization. And at the time they won the award, they had 180 employees, so they related more to a customer service organization, a small customer service organization like Park Place Lexus, than they did to a large healthcare system. Mid-America Transplant Services also has a saying, we take care of our employees so they can take care of others. And this seems like a perfect concept to apply to other organizations. So if some of your employees aren't taking care of the customers directly, they're supporting those who do. And that's part of helping them understand how they contribute to a bigger picture. But you can't fight high turnover in some industries, right? I mean, fast food and casual dining is often greater than 100%, sometimes as high as 200%. In healthcare, particularly long-term healthcare, the turnover rate of certified nursing assistants, CNAs, the average is 25%, but in some locations where there's a very competitive environment, it's much, much higher. And what are other industries that are known for having high turnover, and what do many of them have in common? Well, one of the things that we identified was that long-haul trucking, convenience stores, and low-end retail all have very high turnover rates. And what do they have in common? Well, they have generally low exposure to upper management, so they feel like a very small cog in a big wheel. They have low wages and minimal benefits. In some cases, they're expected to invest in their own uniforms and getting licensing, and in some cases, they face personal danger or the potential for harm. So in convenience stores, if they work on the night shift, they have the potential for robberies. Long-distance trucking, same thing with falling asleep, with having long routes. And certified nursing assistants, they can suffer from lifting injuries. So when you look at that, how do you manage turnover in some of those types of situations? Well, I want to tell you a little bit about PAL's Sudden Service, the first restaurant company to win the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award in 2001. At 26 locations in northern Tennessee and southwest Virginia, they have no sit-down services, only drive-through. It takes an average of 18 seconds to take the order, an average of 12 seconds at the handout window to receive the order, which is 4 times faster than the second fastest quick-serve restaurant in the country. They are staggeringly accurate. They have one mistake for every 3,600 orders, which is 10 times better than the average fast food joint. And they really, really invest in their employees. After they won the Baldrige Award, the founder, Pal Barker, was asked how he could afford to invest 120 hours of training on new employees if they were just going to leave. And Pal replied, but what if I don't invest in them and they stay? All the leaders, including their president, Tom Crosby, are required to spend 10% of their time teaching. And in 33 years, only 7 general managers have voluntarily left the company. And the annual turnover among assistant managers is 1.4%. Turnover among the frontline staff is 1/3 the industry average. So you can see that even in an industry that's well known for its high turnover rates, they have really paid off by investing in their people. Another thing that they do is they interview people in a way, they post it on their website, they interview according to their values. They give tips on what you should be prepared to expect to see in an interview if you come into PAL's. K&N is another fast food casual dining company in Texas who benchmark with PAL's. They have only 2 types of stores, Rudy's Fine Barbecue and Country Store, and Mighty Fine Burgers, Fries, and Shakes. Both are order at the counter style restaurants. However, in that fast casual dining, one of their stores in Texas has the highest dollar sale per square foot of any Texas restaurant of any kind. And on their website, they make it easy to see what they stand for. Now, I haven't had much technological success by playing videos and webinars, but you can see that there are hot links here, and if you go out to YouTube and you look for K&N Management, what you'll see are really entertaining videos that describe the culture and the hiring practices at K&N Management. Just like PAL's, they make it easy to see what it would be like to work at K&N, the top 10 reasons to work there, tips for a successful interview, and they post any open positions that they have. And you'll notice at this time, they had just a handful of positions at any of their stores. You can also get this translated into Spanish, and you can apply in Spanish as well. So we reached out to Larry Potterfield, the founder of Midway USA, a two-time Baldrige Award recipient, and we asked if we could schedule an interview with him, and he said there's no way that we could do justice to his Baldrige journey story in a 45-minute phone interview. So he invited us to come up to spend a day with him in his organization. While we were there, the employees were etching the company's values on the sidewalk in front of each building. Originally, Larry had intended to subcontract the work, but the employees wanted to do it themselves. And so you can see they got like mini air jackhammers and safety glasses, and each employee got to etch 3 letters of these values. Larry calls these his concrete values because he wanted to reinforce his commitment to them that they weren't going to change. And to further demonstrate how important these are to the employees, he shared with us that for the first few weeks, the employees wouldn't even walk on them, but skirted around them almost like they were sacred. They've gotten past it now. Okay, are your values real, or are they your laminated values? I read a quote recently that the culture of any organization is determined by the worst behavior the senior leaders tolerate. Lots of folks have badge hangers where they put their values, their vision, and their mission. But with Elevation's credit union, they're very intentional about it, and they really use those as teaching points and also part of their recruiting and hiring. I had a great story from a colleague of mine who's a CEO who decided to test the senior leaders' genuine commitment to their organization's values. So he went to the conference room early where they were going to have their weekly senior leader meeting, and he removed the plaque from the wall with the mission, vision, and values. Then when they came in, he handed out paper and pens and challenged the senior leaders to write down the values from memory. Only 30% could. And he chastised them by saying, how can we expect our employees to live the values if we don't? And how can we ensure that we live the values if we don't even know what they are? So I thought that was a pretty profound test that some of you might want to take in your own organizations. So I talked about Elevation's credit union. They won the Baldrige Award in 2014. They also make it really easy for prospective employees to see if they would be a good fit with the organization. They have a downloadable culture book on their career page that says, why work at Elevation? And we'll come back to their culture book in a few minutes. I think it's a best practice for sure. Some of the senior leaders that we interviewed talked with how they demonstrate that they're all in with employees when they're going through bad times. And 2 in particular stood out for us. So Paul Worstel, who is the retired CEO of ProTech Coating, described what happened when they went from running at 110% plant capacity to less than 40%, almost overnight. It was a perfect storm when the economy fell out in 2008 and 2009, and there was a dramatic cutback from their Japan automakers who were their primary customers. They had outsourced many of their activities while they had such a high capacity running in their plant. And so they brought those all in-house so that they wouldn't have to lay anybody off. And that included having people who had formerly worked the line and engineers doing all of their groundskeeping. And Paul told us that he proudly, his job was cleaning the men's restroom in the administration building. That was his job as CEO of the company. And one of the things that that did was that really communicated to all the employees was that this isn't about the little people taking the hit when we have a downturn. This is about all of us. So Park Place Lexus, in the same time period, weathered that same perfect storm. So with the bad economy, you don't have a lot of folks buying luxury cars. They also had a problem in that most of their customers that were supplying their luxury cars had been faced with a tsunami in Japan. So they went from having an inventory of about 450 cars on their lot to about 60. Most of their competitors, when you have a downturn like that, they lay off or they significantly reduce their sales force. Park Place Lexus said, no, we believe in our people, we believe investing in our people. We're going to, but sales force also gets paid on commission by the number of vehicles they sell. They said, that's not fair because the conditions have changed, so we're going to pay you the same thing we paid you a year ago until we come out of this slump. And we're going to invest the time that you have on your hands to send you to more sales training. So when the economy came back up, they had almost zero turnover in their sales force, but they had a highly engaged, highly committed, and highly loyal sales force who knew that they had been protected during that downturn. So more on preventing workforce reductions. This is that same time frame. The city of Irving, Texas, that was also a Baldrige Award recipient. They began using Lean Six Sigma in 2007. And during the economic downturn, so that they would not have to continue to reduce the workforce, they used it to improve productivity, reduce cycle time, and reduce costs. They saved more than $44 million. And they decreased their workforce by 10%, primarily through attrition as opposed to reductions in force. And in 2009 and 2010, they gave incentives and raises and promoted more than 600 people, which was unheard of in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And they also have some great YouTube videos that really show the engagement of their frontline staff. So let's talk about ensuring a safe work environment. Kindred Mountain Valley Nursing and Rehab, which is now Cascadia Mountain Valley Nursing and Rehab, first won the Long-Term Care Association's Baldrige-based Gold Quality Award in 2011. They never stopped their pursuit of excellence, and in 2016 they became the first and to date only skilled nursing facility to win the Baldrige Award. And we've been proud to work with them throughout their journey. They're truly an amazing organization. And anybody that tries to give us excuses for why their organization can't be excellent, I would point to Mountain Valley. They're in a very rural setting in Kellogg, Idaho, which has a population of about 2,000 people. Their facility was built in 1970, 68 beds. They have no private rooms, no fancy spa-like amenities, but they deliver outstanding care and have earned both their clients, their patients, and their families, as well as their employees, excellence and engagement. A lot of times we get excuses about why you can't engage frontline staff in quality improvement. And I will say that it's very unusual to find CNAs, certified nursing assistants, in long-term care who have any training on basic quality tools. No training on data visualization. But the executive director at Mountain Valley is very innovative, and she began using data visualization or data display to engage her staff in trying to address falls. And so they began tracking the time of day to determine if noise contributed to falls. And when they confirmed that noise does make a difference, they implemented certain things that really tried to minimize that noise. And they also started looking at having more staffing available when residents were finishing their lunch and wanting to lie down, and really managing those handoffs during shift changes. Then they started trending by day of the week. And they weren't surprised by the day of the week, but they were surprised that the time of day on Fridays had the most falls. So they educated the staff, and the senior leaders began making their rounds on Fridays to ensure that all the interventions got in place. And what they learned is, just like the Hawthorne effect, is what they put their focus on got positive results. Here's another example of simple data display that the staff can manage itself. It's a simple one made of poster board and stick-on colored stars, and the staff manage it. And it's a positive reinforcement when they see the progress that that's being made. And here's the proof in the pudding. Over the 4-year period, engaging the staff and using data collection and analysis to reduce falls. The other thing that Mary Ruth attributes is really working on creating a culture of safety. So at the beginning, she did a survey, a culture of safety survey, and you can see the results there, that in 2013, 59% of the respondents did not agree that departments collaborated effectively with each other. And a year later, in really reinforcing this culture of safety, 66 agreed. If you look at the far right hand about comfortable reporting errors, 29% disagreed with that in 2013, and 80% agreed with it in 2014. And another way that you can really see the engagement going up in creating this culture of safety is the participation in the survey itself went up from 42% in 2013 to 85% in 2014. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and start talking about a broader view of culture beyond just patient safety. We did these interviews where we had some standard questions and some custom ones for all of our interviews with the senior leaders. We never asked a question about culture in our interviews. And when we reviewed the transcripts of all the interviews we had done, we realized that every leader we interviewed for the book talked about their organization's culture. They were intentional about the culture. Their culture related explicitly to the vision and mission. It was shaped by the values, and it was used to engage and empower employees. So let's get back to Elevation's Credit Union. This is their downloadable culture book. And they talk about what they promise to employees and their expectations of their employees. So we promise this will be the best place you've ever worked. Has any organization promised you that when you were interviewing? I've never experienced that. We promise you will be part of a winning team, do worthwhile work, be empowered to make decisions, have a career, not a job, and have servant leadership. But here's the rub. But we expect you to believe your behavior matters. Give 100% effort and 0 excuses. Be flexible and fluid. Have work-life fit, and continuously learn. But then they also talk about having a fun culture. In some settings, you may think it's hard to create a culture that is fun, but it's no less important. In fact, we see in very high stress, high burnout environments, such as healthcare, that it's very important to take time to create a culture of fun. I know the CEO and other executives at an ambulance company. They take time to have fun and build camaraderie. They have Nerf ball contests, celebrate goofy holidays, have crazy sock day. Again, not taking anything away from the seriousness of the work that they do, but trying to make sure that they all feel that they are a team and that their team takes care of each other. So if your organization had a culture book, what would it say? Would you be proud to share the reality of your culture? And if the answer is no, what would you want it to say? And what are the gaps between your real culture and the desired state? I worked in an organization one time that really had the laminated values. They bore no resemblance to the behaviors that were accepted by the senior leaders in the organization. And in fact, we were so cynical. At one time, the joke was, it'd be nice if he would walk the talk, but I'd be happy if he just stumbled the mumble. So take a look at this and think about that. Challenge yourself to, if you were going to put a culture book that would attract potential job recipients, attract applicants, what would you say about your organization? Because whether it's out there, sooner or later, your employees know what's in your culture book. So some of you, I hope, are from healthcare, and you're very familiar with rounding, the principle of rounding. But we've seen it being adopted by organizations outside of healthcare, and it has to be systematic. It has to be intentional, and it has to lead to visible change when employees raise concerns or offer ideas for improvement. So we were doing focus groups with an organization in hospitality. And its focus groups can be a type of rounding, but they're not nearly as effective as rounding done by senior leaders, where you're really doing one-on-one. But we asked a question of a group of housekeepers: do you have all the equipment and supplies you need to do your job? And one brave lady spoke up and said, no, we don't have enough laundry carts. And it's embarrassing to me to be dragging trash bags filled with linens and towels when I go to make up the rooms. This was a very high-end hospitality organization, and I could feel her embarrassment. And when you think about that, why should that have been an issue at all? When we hire people to do a job, we as managers owe them the training, the equipment, the supplies, whatever is needed to let them do a good job. But we also owe them a forum to tell us that in a way that doesn't seem like they're whining or making excuses. But that's one of the things about doing intentional rounding, is asking for their feedback. What do you need to do your job? Who should be recognized? What's going well for you? What's going not so well for you? Maybe 4 to 6 questions, but really listening and really acting on that feedback. So again, we love Mountain Valley. One of the things that they've done is they've just made it not just their clinical people, but every senior leader, including the business office manager, and that's Ira in the middle, their maintenance director, every senior leader rounds. They have a standard group of rooms, so they get to know the residents in those rooms, their families, and a standard group of employees, because they have primarily consistent staffing. They update their rounding sheets, and they talk about them in their daily stand-up meeting. Now, what does this mean? Well, you typically are never going to have a business office manager that has developed relationships with residents. But what's one of the #1 complaints in long-term care? We don't understand our bills. So now she's a very approachable person. Even if she's not rounding on your rooms, you see her rounding in the building. When Mary Ruth, who's the executive director, isn't available to do the daily stand-up meeting, we were quite surprised. Ira, the maintenance director, runs the daily stand-up meeting. Why? Because he knows everything that's going on in the building, and he knows what should be taken care of. The first time we'd ever seen someone who was not clinical running the daily stand-up meeting in long-term care. Let me just go back to that a second, because I haven't shared with you their results. Mountain Valley, this little 68-bed long-term care facility in Nowhere, Idaho, has been a CMS 5-star rated overall and CMS 5-star in quality measures since CMS started providing those ratings in 2009. That represents 0.9% of all the long-term care facilities in the United States. For the past 3 years, their resident and family satisfaction has been at 100%. And their turnover rate for staff is less than half of the state average. So let's talk about high performance. These are some of the ways that senior leaders we interviewed build an engaged workforce that deliver these exceptional results. Really connecting every person to the strategic objectives of what's most important to the organization. Again, like Mary Ruth did with those data visualization boards, using data to communicate progress, providing recognition for achieving goals, investing in training and development like PALS, and focusing on the drivers of workforce engagement. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. So connecting people to what's most important. The City of Irving, Texas won the Baldrige Award in 2012. And when the examiners were conducting walkarounds to talk with frontline employees, they came across a fellow picking up trash along one of the streets. And so they asked him what he was doing. It was pretty obvious. He was picking up trash. He explained he was creating a model for safe and beautiful neighborhoods. Now, that may not make a big deal to you, except the City of Irving's vision statement happens to be, the City of Irving will be a model for safe and beautiful neighborhoods, a vibrant economy, and exceptional recreational, cultural, and educational opportunities. So this fellow picking up trash clearly felt connected to a higher purpose. He wasn't just picking up trash. So one of the things that we found interesting was that companies that survey employees at least every other year report about 50% of their employees are champions, those that are highly engaged, versus only 29% for those who don't regularly survey their employees or don't survey them at all. But you don't have to wait for an annual survey. You don't have to wait for an every other year survey. You have some informal methods of assessing whether your workforce is engaged. When you hold voluntary meetings or events, or ask for participation in community activities, what's the attendance rate? What's your absenteeism look like? What's your safety look like? There's absolute evidence that suggests that as workforce engagement declines, workplace safety incidents increase. And if you have a program, a union program, what is your grievance rate? Okay. So let's talk about leveraging the drivers of workplace engagement. Most surveys conducted by a third party provide the drivers of engagement as determined by a regression analysis. What they look at are what questions that correlate most strongly with willingness to recommend for a job, and in healthcare, it's willingness to recommend as a place for care. So they're correlating those questions that have the highest influence on a positive response to willingness to recommend. What we've seen, though, is many times leaders ignore how to read the report that they receive, and they focus in on the lowest scoring questions, which may or may not move that trigger, that needle of engagement at all. So the other thing you want to do is you want to validate the drivers through meeting with small groups of employees. And you may find that the drivers of engagement change based on the employee group that you're talking with. So frontline staff employees may have a different driver of engagement than some, say, your middle managers. It may vary by department. So what you're really trying to do is tailor your actions to deliver on something that will matter. And make sure that you communicate why you're doing it. So connect the dots for your employees. We're implementing an XYZ program because we heard you in our survey. We knew that was important to you, and here's what we're doing in response. And again, remember one of those first reasons, primary reasons for lack of engagement is trust in senior leaders. So think about the best practices that I've shared with you. Which of them appeal to you? Why? How easy would it be for you to implement some of these? And what resistance might you run into? So before we wrap up the webinar, I wanted to also share with you some lessons learned about these leaders that we interviewed, because again, they're all from award-winning organizations. And we asked them, what are the three things, if you went to another organization, what are the three things that you would absolutely replicate because they were so effective? And if you had to do it all over again, what would you change? And these are some of their top lessons learned. The first one was really the value of having examiners in the organization, either at a state or national level, really taking that understanding of the Baldrige Excellence Framework to a deeper level. Many of the senior leaders that we talked to didn't become examiners themselves until later in the journey, and they really said it would have been so much more helpful if they had been able to lead from that point of knowledge at the beginning. The value of the state and regional Baldrige-based programs, not so scary. Many of them have tiered application processes, so you don't have to jump right in a 55-page application. The importance of not taking a year off, because you oftentimes will lose momentum, and focusing on the journey and not the award. Really focusing on becoming award worthy rather than receiving that crystal. And the need to not do Baldrige on the side, really make it the way that you run your business. So I'm going to turn it back over to Doug in a minute to have you ask your questions, but I'd like for you to take a few minutes at the end of this webinar to jot down just one or two actions. I find it's always easy when I attend webinars or go to conferences to have a pocket full of good intentions and to not implement any of them because I haven't made a commitment to do this, to take that time to document which ones I'm really going to pursue. Just very quickly, this is the book that's the basis for this webinar. I already gave you a little bit of background on it. One of the things that we've done is it's not a book that we expect people to read from front to back. We really wanted to tailor it so that busy executives, people like yourselves, could jump into a chapter that really made the most sense. So for instance, if you're a very large organization, you may not care too much about what are the challenges of being very small. But on the other hand, if you're a very small organization, less than 100 employees, reading about the journey for two very, very large Boeing divisions may not be that practical for you. So we just tried to tailor it to make it easy for you to use. And with that, I'm going to provide my contact information, and I'm turning it back over to Doug.
Thank you, Kay. That was really great. And those of you who are attending, probably happy to see that we are on schedule. If you are interested in getting the slides, send an email to kay@baldrige-coach.com. Her email's on the screen, and she will help you out with that. And if you have any questions that come up later, you may also send them to Kay. So we've had a couple of questions that came up here. There was sort of a string going on here. We were, one of the folks here, Philip, had been talking about how does PALS Southern Service pay their employees, a wage that corresponds with the increase in standard living. Well, I did a quick Google search, and it says PALS pays $8 an hour for their lower-level employees. And so he went on, he says, yeah, well, that's not really a living wage. Well, I came back and I said, it appears that pay may not necessarily correlate well with employee engagement, which is kind of counter to what we hear. What do you know about that, Kay?
We actually find that pay is more frequently a satisfier. It's a moment in time, but it does not lead to engagement. And you're absolutely right that there are so many other aspects of a person's time at work. One of the questions that we find interesting is a question that is a very good predictor of high engagement is a positive response to, I have a best friend at work. And we see that a lot of times when people describe their work environment as family. And so if I have a trusted work environment that also represents compassion and empathy to me as a person, that pay may be a little less important. So I'll give you an example. We have a lot of clients in long-term care who give very flexible scheduling options to their employees, so that if somebody has an issue with dropping kids off for daycare, they're not rigid with their shifts. When you have a CNA going back to school to become an LPN, again, very flexible scheduling. And so if I'm in that environment and I have an opportunity for growth and to better myself and to move up into higher paying positions, we see a lot of people in long-term care in the right organizations that went from a housekeeper to a CNA to an LPN and now to an RN. Well, with each one of those increases in higher skill levels, they see pay increases too. But what happened was the organization supported them during that time. I don't know if that answered your question, Doug, but pay is, we have yet to see a third-party survey where pay itself correlates as a driver of engagement.
Okay, probably so. Probably so. So the, it seems that it can be a dissatisfier, but it's not a satisfier. Okay.
It can be, and
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just going back to Hertzberg, right? He said that 50 years ago or more.
Right.
So another question came up, asked about what are some of the good questions on a employee satisfaction survey? But I think you kind of said best practice. You're also looking at best practices in employee satisfaction. What do you have to say on that?
I'd encourage everybody to Google the Gallup 12. They're pretty standard questions that, regardless of the third party, are incorporated in there somewhere, and they have been validated over time repeatedly as being indicators of employee engagement. So even if you're doing SurveyMonkey yourself, I'd say Google Gallup, G-A-L-L-U-P 12, and make sure that your survey instrument includes those 12 questions.
Okay, good. One individual here, Victor, says the problem he sees is the persons in leadership positions who never embrace the culture or the nature of the organization. And yeah, I liked your phrase. What did you say? I don't care if he walks the walk, but he at least has to stumble the mumble.
Right. And it's interesting because we have a chapter on, what do you have to do to get your senior leaders on board? And in some cases, in very different responses, some of the senior leaders invited people to leave if they weren't getting on board, and some of them were really committed not to do that, but they had various ways of dealing with it. And David Spong, of the 2 Boeing divisions that won the Baldrige Award, it's really funny. He finally had a one-on-one talk with one of his senior leaders, and he said, I'm to the point where I really don't care if you believe, as long as you act and talk like you believe. And that was the challenge. And he said by the end of the journey, this fellow had actually come to be a believer. But David just couldn't afford him, spending his time undermining the effort.
Yeah. So we got a question here from Wallace. He says, how can you present a case for the kind of investments needed for engagement when most P&L leaders are institutionally focused on cutting costs?
Oh, I love that question. What we see repeatedly is most of the things that are needed to engage employees are either no or low cost. And I'll just give you some examples. We don't see any huge in programs. I mean, it's all driven by the personal behaviors, actions of the senior leaders. So there are several senior leaders that we know. We just went to the Quest for Excellence, which is the Baldrige Best Practices Conference. Several of them talked about the power of handwritten thank you notes sent to the employees' homes. I mean, you think about that. It's not just a recognition in front of your peers, but a handwritten thank you note from the CEO that goes to your home where your spouse and your kids get to see it and get to see you being bragged on and appreciated. What does that cost? One of the CEOs says she does 10 a week. That's her goal. She'll do more if she has more, but she makes it a goal. As a minimum, she has to write 10 a week. And she says, what does that mean? About 30 minutes a week. there's so many other things that we see, that some spontaneous recognition vehicles that don't have to be anything big and expensive. So Tri-County Tech, it's a technical college in Oklahoma. They hand out these things that they're the White Bison Award. Why white bison? Because in the Native American culture there, a white bison, an albino bison, is a very rare creature, and it's viewed with some degree of reverence. So for them, they have these little things. They're White Bison Awards. Again, low or no cost. The CEO of the ambulance company that I mentioned, they made a huge change in their employee engagement, and Mike, their CEO, told us that one of the reasons was he made a change in his behavior. What he found out through feedback was that he had been a yes but person. People would come to him with a big idea, they were all excited, and his immediate response was yes but. And it's like being dashed with cold water. And so he made a New Year's resolution. He made a conscious effort. He invited a few senior leaders to challenge him if he didn't follow through with it, to have a yes and. So somebody would come with an idea, and yes, and I really want to hear more about that. And yes, and what would it take for us to explore that? Which is a very different response to people than a yes but. So any other questions, Doug?
I think one individual came back. I think he was the one who was talking about the low pay. Apparently, he'd worked at a company where very long hours, and the company was doing extremely well, 20% growth a year, and they did not share the wealth with the employees. Now, I don't know if this was true there, but I strongly suspect that if you have leaders who they don't walk the walk, that what you're seeing there is a demonstration of that. If the leadership are really, sincerely, thanking employees for what they're doing, you're not going to see a situation where people are just left out in the cold while the company's doing very well. Do you think that is true?
I absolutely think that's true. And I'll give you the flip side of that. I was living in the Bay Area when we had the perfect storm in the early 2000s, where semi-tech, telecom, and the economy tanked. And I mean, it went from just being on a huge, huge upsurge to overnight just being a disaster. And a lot of the organizations ultimately had to do reductions in force, but the company that I was with, I was a VP of quality at the time, we had it that the CEO and the CFO took a 30% cut. The VPs took a 25% cut in pay. Directors took a 20%, managers a 15%, and no frontline employees took any cut in pay. And we were very public about it. And it was the right thing to do. It was absolutely the right thing to do. And I would, it's not fun having that kind of a cut overnight, but it was the right thing to do, and it sent the right message. So I think that's really important, and I think all of us in our careers at some point have to say, I'm seeing the true values, not the laminated ones. I'm seeing the true values of this organization. Are they congruent with my personal values? And sometimes we have to make tough career choices. I've always said that, unless I'm the CEO, even if I'm pretty high up in the organization, unless I'm the CEO, I have very little ability to influence the culture of the organization in a positive way. And if I can't accept those values that are being demonstrated as being congruent with my own, then I have to change. I have to change where I'm working.
Sometimes you have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been an observation I've seen in other organizations that when they take their values and beliefs and they print them and frame them on the wall, okay, it seems too often they cease to live them.
I agree with you, and that's why I try to present a few best practices for those who make them real, keep them alive, build them into their recruiting and hiring processes. I think, again, I think the CEO friend of mine that took them off the wall and challenged all the senior leaders to write them down from memory, I thought that was a brilliant, bold move. I think that's a great exercise to do in every organization periodically. And then I worked with another colleague as part of a networking group. Their senior leaders, this was a division of Xerox, their senior leaders came up with a badge tag that was the 10 unacceptable behaviors. And so they did it a little, I won't say backwards, but they looked at their values, they agreed those are still the right values, and then they said, what behaviors do we see in the organization that don't reflect these values? And are we really committing as senior leaders to say, these are unacceptable, they will not be tolerated by anyone at any level? And once they did that, they had an all-town hall meeting. They distributed those, and they asked employees to call out any of the senior leaders that they saw exhibiting those behaviors. And what they also did was they planted a few senior leaders to act as those who would challenge a bad behavior. And that moved through the grapevine like lightning speed. So it became common knowledge to people that they were serious about this, and that yes, you could challenge someone if they were demonstrating a behavior that had been deemed intolerant. I think that's probably, to me, one of the quickest ways to get at a toxic culture, is to define those behaviors that you will no longer tolerate at the highest level of the organization.
So it has nothing to do with statistics.
Oh, I don't have any statistical basis for that, but I would say just in terms of observing organizations, particularly when new CEOs try to come in and try to change the culture, what do they have to do? And over again, I've seen that they have to make unacceptable something that used to be tolerated.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Kay, I appreciate your being with us today. This was really great. And looks like we've only a few people have had to leave. What I'd like to do now, though, is just do a couple of closing items for everybody. Again, if you have more questions, you may email them to Kay. Her address is on the screen. And Kay, I will put your email address in the email that goes out after the session to thank people for attending and tell them their recertification units. And I will also include a link that you may view this video by way of on the servers that WebEx keeps, okay? So that email should come, again, within 24 hours. It's either in 3 or 24 next day. So we'll give you that. So it's time to end our program today. I want to thank, again, Kay for being here. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay. And I also want to thank each and every one of you for participating and asking good questions. I wish you well. I hope you'll stay in touch. And with that, we'll say goodbye for today. So everyone,
thank you.
Care.
Bye-bye.